Howdy neighbors, welcome to Cedar Creek Homestead today. I hope you're having a wonderful and blessed day. And today's subject we're going to talk about is, I'm going to call it living on beans. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the number one food that we lived on when I was growing up here in Oklahoma, and also the way that we preserve the beans and the way that we store them and so forth and so on. So before I get into today's video though, I want to ask you if you would help us out by subscribing to our channel if you're able. We would certainly appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button, and after it comes up, after you have subscribed, there'll be a little bell pops up right beside the subscribe icon. And if you'll click on that, you'll be notified when we air our Porch Talk videos each Tuesday night at 7 o'clock p.m. And we'd certainly invite you to join us. And some have asked, even wanting to give us money. And we're not asking for that, but what we are asking for is your subscription. And if you would subscribe to the channel, we'd greatly appreciate it. We would greatly appreciate it. And we want to say a big howdy to all of our new subscribers, as well as a thank you to everybody that's subscribing. Our old subscribers, the ones that's been with us all along, and the new alike. And sounds like a train's coming through. I hope you can hear me over the roar of the train today. Good tea this evening. It's a little hot here in eastern Oklahoma, and we had a little cool down. But it seems to be heating back up. But according to the weather, we're going to have another cool down in this week. There's a potential total in the next 7 days to get like 8 inches of rain here. And if we get that much rain, that will be something for this time of the year. But anyhow, we're going to get on into today's subject, and that is living on beans. We're going to talk about beans today. And when I was growing up, our number one food item that we ate more than anything else that I can remember eating, we ate pinto beans. And we ate so many pinto beans that I got tired of them. Now, pinto beans are good. They're healthy for you. They taste good. They are cheap. I know they're going up in price now, but they are still probably cheaper than a lot of things. And also, pinto beans, not just pinto beans. It could be lima beans. It could be peas, like black-eyed peas, anything that's a dried bean that you can get. And I'll go into that a little bit more detail, but they're very healthy for you. One of my sisters still eats lots and lots of beans, and she is as skinny as a rail, and is the healthiest one of us kids. Got the lowest cholesterol, the lowest sugar, never has any of that kind of stuff. And I think it's because she eats so many beans. So there's something to be said to that. But we ate beans growing up. We also had fried potatoes with the beans, and we had meat, but we had more beans than we had anything else. If we, there were a lot of meals that we didn't even have any meat. We just had pinto beans. Now, every once in a while, we would have black-eyed peas, or if I went over to my grandparents that lived just a little ways over here, she liked to fix these big white lima beans, and they kind of got a nutty flavor to them, and I really like to eat them. And I remember going over there one Saturday and visiting my grandpa, and I was a young fella, still in school, and she had brought a bowl of beans out there they had a little covered deal, what people would call a gazebo today, but they didn't know what you call it. It's just a little outside covered area to eat in. And we sat out there, me and my grandpa, and she brought this bowl of beans out, and we put some in our bowls, and we kept eating till we ate that whole deal of beans. And she come out there, and she said she was going to eat with us. She said, "Where is the beans?" And Grandpa thought she had even more probably inside, because people generally used to cook with big pots and stuff, but that was all the lima beans that she had cooked, so we ate all the beans, so she wasn't very happy with us. But oftentimes we'd have meals in the summertime would be pinto beans, and maybe sliced tomatoes, fried okra, fried squash, something like that. It may not even have any meat. We raised our own meat, and our main sources of meat that we had when I was growing up was chicken and pork, and we rarely had very much beef. And that may be why I like beef so well today, because I just didn't have it growing up. But at Thanksgiving time, my grandmother, not just Thanksgiving, Christmas, any of the major holidays, 4th of July, my grandmother, one of my grandmothers, would, if we went to her home, she always had a large pot of chili beans. And I loved her chili beans. I thought they were the best thing. Now, most would say, why would you cook chili beans when you have turkey and dressing? You have mashed potatoes and gravy and all the great trimmings that go along with that. Why would you have chili beans? And I had never thought about that until I got older. So I asked my mom about it, and she said, well, Granny tried to feed so many people that in the process of trying to feed them, she would fix this big pot of chili beans, and that would help make the meal, the other stuff, go further. If everybody ate a few chili beans, then that helped fill you up. Another thing about chili beans, they're good with so many things. We used to have them with Crichton weenies. Sometimes we'd have hominy. We did... Us kids had all different ways of eating them. We canned peppers, my folks did, and we still do that today. And you put hot peppers in a jar and put vinegar on them and let them pickle, so to speak. And you pour that hot pepper juice over into your beans and stir it up, and it spices them up some and gives them that little vinegary wang to them. And we like to eat, that was a way to doctor them up so that they tasted different. We also had chow chow, if you're familiar with that. And Josie still makes some stuff like chow chow. It's she calls it, we call it piccalilli. Her grandmother called it piccalilli, but it's a chopped up, kind of like a green tomato relish. Now, I've heard other people say their piccalilli was a different thing, but that's what we call piccalilli or chow chow. And you'd put a scoop of that in your beans, and that helps. We also put mustard, mayonnaise. We put ketchup in our beans. If they had just a little deal of chili powder, we would just sprinkle some chili powder in our beans. Oftentimes on Saturdays, we would go down to visit my grandmother. That's probably about 15-20 miles from here, and that was usually what you had for lunch. And sometimes we would have a bologna sandwich along with the pinto beans, but usually it would be pinto beans, and she would either make homemade biscuits or homemade cornbread, and you had one or the other. I do not care much for cornbread because we had it so much. You would have cornbread with your beans, then you would have cornbread for dessert, and they would crumble up the cornbread and put it in a glass of milk, or they would pour buttermilk on it. Now, the buttermilk just makes it uneatable, in my opinion, but a lot of people love that was a big treat. Now, if it was kind of a sweet cornbread, sometimes we had that. I kind of like that with a little bit of jelly. We always had homemade jellies and stuff, but we ate so many beans. Beans give you a lot of energy. They give you energy in more than one way. And but nonetheless, if you ate a big bowl of green beans, let's say, green beans, if you're out working hard and you're working on the farm, your homestead, whatever, you're having to labor, and you ate green beans, they just won't give you all that much energy. But pinto beans will give you a lot of energy. Pinto beans have a lot of protein. In fact, I have been told before that you could, if you ate beans, would be fine, pinto beans, as a substitute for protein, for meat and stuff like that. Now, growing up, besides having chicken and pork, we ate a lot of wild game. There were lots of bobwhite quail around this area, and when season was on, we hunted bobwhite quail, and usually at least once a week, Mom would fry up a bobwhite quail, and I love fried bobwhite quail. It tastes pretty much like chicken. I like the quail legs, and they're so little that it would take quite a few, probably 10 legs to fill me up or more. But we'd have pinto beans. With about everything we had pinto beans. Now, we might have fried potatoes with it. We might have mashed potatoes and gravy. We might have fried potatoes. Or we might just have something like fried deer meat, deer steak. And we would have that and beans. That was the meal. And the beans, to me, got better the further you went. As you got towards the end of the bowl of beans, like Mom would cook a big pot on Saturdays, and we would eat on it Saturday during the day, maybe for lunch or supper. We'd start eating on that pot of beans, and then we'd have them for Sunday, and then throughout the week. And towards the end of the week, it just depended. Sometimes they might make it to Tuesday, sometimes that pot of beans, depending on what else we had to go with it, might make it to Wednesday or Thursday. And there might be a day that we didn't have any beans, but Mom would cook another pot up, and that stayed in the fridge, and she would just set the whole big pot out on the stove and keep warming up. But they got better the further they went, and the juice would get real thick, almost like a gravy type thickness. And I love to take that and put that over a white bread, like a slice of white light bread. Sandwich bread, I guess you'd call it. So that was always so good, and they get kind of salty towards the end. But, that's what we had to live on to survive. When we went to school, once a week, the school had beans. And maybe you're of this generation, you know what I'm talking about. We were poor people. We did not realize how poor we were until I'm grown now, and I realized we were very poor. But I have to say that most people around this area that we knew were in the same boat we were. They didn't have much either. And, you hear that song, Coal Miner's Daughter. I used to have words that I sung to that, but mine said I was a boat mechanic's son. My dad was a boat mechanic for years, and a boat engine mechanic, outboard engine technician, I guess you'd call him. And so, but we grew up without a lot of money. So Mom and Dad would raise a big garden. We ate out of that garden. But one reason that people, and we raised our own food, own chickens, raised our own hogs, fed the hog slop, and we lived off of beans. And one reason we lived off beans, the reason that people choose that. Now, a lot of preppers will say rice and beans to prep those back. And yes, rice is a good, easy thing to prep back. Rice is a good one. I would say rice and beans for your food choices. Now, you got to remember, you got to have water to go along. You can live longer without food than you can water. So always keep that in mind, that you need a good water source. And a lot of folks depend on the rural water systems, or you could say they rely upon the government entities for their water. I don't trust the government for anything. I think we have a good government for the most part, and could always use improvements. I'm glad to be living in America, but we need to be self-sufficient. And if you're not prepping food, you are, folks, it's scary what's coming. And I'm just going to tell you, if you've got something back, and I'm going to show you in just a minute these beans, if you've got something put back to sustain you in a time of an emergency, and it could be done really easy with pinto beans. Now, you wouldn't want to live on those just alone forever. When I was a kid, I felt like the Bible should have said, instead of man shall not live by bread alone, I thought it should have been man shall not live by pinto beans alone. And we would have one day a week at school, they would have pinto beans. And I would get so aggravated when they would say today was pinto bean day. And the teachers would act like they were so excited that we were having pinto beans. And I was like, why would we be excited about having something that I have at least once a day, it seems like, and sometimes 2 times a day. But the teachers would be so excited that there was bean day. And I guess because they worked at the school, they didn't have time to cook them up. Now, I feel the best beans is a pot of beans that's been cooked on the stove on a slow fire, a slow boil for a few hours. And cook slow and long is the best flavored beans. Now, Josie has one of these instant cooker things. It's like a pressure cooker type deal that she can put beans in, and in just a little while they're ready to eat. And they taste good. There's nothing wrong with that, but they are not as good, in my opinion, as a slow cooked pot of beans on the stove. So if she was to ask me my druthers, I would say I want a pot of beans cooked on the stove the old-fashioned way, with some ham hock in it, or some kind of pork in it, bacon, or if you had ham, if we had leftover ham, you could put the ham bone in it, something like that. But I have ate many a pot of beans without anything but just salt in them, just water and salt and no seasoning, like pork or anything. But the pork fat, cooking in those sure makes them taste good. And we one thing growing up, and I mentioned that coal miner's daughter's song, she said we were poor but we had love, and that's one thing that Daddy made sure of. I will have to say that's one thing we had here, is a love. When we gathered around the table, and I attribute some of my weight problems I've had in life, because some of the most fond memories I have is us gathering around the supper table and our family eating together. It's one time that the guys all had to have their shirts on. Everybody had to be washed up. They would say, wash up, it's supper time. And if we were outside out here in the pasture where I live today, it was where I was raised, me and my little brother would be out here, maybe down on the creek playing, and that's pretty good little ways from here. But my mom or my sisters, usually one of them would step out and say, y'all boys come home, it's supper time. And some of our best times was eating. Now, we might not have ate steak or prime rib or something like that. In fact, we loved bologna. We were glad to get a bologna sandwich, but we'd all come and gather around over here at the dinner table, and we had a good time. And everybody talked about whatever the goings-on of the day was, and it seemed like kind of a no-wake zone. Nobody argued, no problems. Dad sat at the head of the table, and we just had a good time. Oftentimes, if somebody was visiting, they just ate with us. And if you had a cousin staying over, or cousins just happened to be here, and it was supper time, we just all ate together, and we had a good time. Now, lunchtime, a lot of times we were all headed different directions, whatever. But at supper time, when Mom said it was supper time, you better be here, and you better be ready. And we knew about the time that it was that we were going to eat, and you better be around here if you want something to eat, because once they dug in, there might not be anything left. And but if you had a job and you worked late, Mom would always fix you a plate and set it on the stove or in the oven or something, and when you got home, she'd say your food's in there ready to go. But it was always better when you ate it fresh. And we had a lot of gravy, and gravy goes good with food too. Of course, you can make that really easy and cheap, but I always thought that you made gravy with water. You know, you get your flour cooking in your drippings of whatever you've maybe fried up, and then you add a big glass of water to it and cook that in and make a gravy out of it. Well, a while back, someone had made mention that they were so poor they had water gravy. And when I left home and was by myself for a while, batching, working for a company, I would want gravy. I'd get hungry for it, and I thought that's how you made it, with water. I didn't know you used milk to make the gravy. Josie really makes good gravy, and it's because she uses milk. And I thought, boy, her gravy's way better than mine. It's because she uses milk in her gravy. But anyhow, the beans, getting back to beans, there is so many different things you could do with beans, and that the one again is making chili beans. But had it not been for beans, we probably would have had a rough time. But the reason folks did beans, the main reason, was because they were cheap. If you had a farm, a garden, a homestead, you could grow them cheap. You could take the seeds, if you dried the beans and kept them over winter, any leftover seeds that you had, you could grow a crop of beans. If you had an acre or a few acres or whatever, or a garden in the back of your yard, you could grow a bunch of pinto beans easy. Around here, I don't know if it's everywhere, but you don't need to fertilize them. I've got a row of beans right now that have not been fertilized. As long as they get some moisture, the beans will just grow, and they're so easy to grow. And you can take seeds. I've got beans here that I believe would sprout. Now, I'd probably soak them overnight because I've had them since 2015. I'm fixing to talk about that here in just a little bit. They're 5-year-old, but nonetheless, you could take those beans and you could soak them and plant them, and I believe they would still come up today. It may not come up as good as just beans that were kept over the winter. Used to, farmers would even pull the beans up by the whole plant and leave, if they were getting dry, if they weren't completely dried out where you could shell them real easy, they'd just pull the whole thing up, store them in a shed somewhere, and when they got caught up with their stuff, then they would shell the beans out, and they'd just fall out of the shell, and they'd clean them. And you may remember this, like you get a bag of beans, and people do that today, but it don't seem like they're as dirty as they used to be. But you would put them on the counter and kind of flip through the beans and take them out, and you would take out the old beans. And I remember seeing my mom doing that a bunch. Beans that were shriveled up, that didn't look good. Sometimes they'd be a rock or some kind of piece of something in there that you didn't want. Might even be a bug in there, an old dead bug. Well, you'd rake that over and then take those beans and put in your colander or whatever you had and wash them under the sink. But folks did beans because they were easy to come by. Even if you had to buy them, you could buy a 50-pound bag of pinto beans relatively cheap. You could buy, we used to go buy 100-pound sacks. We grew a lot of potatoes, but we would go buy 100-pound sacks of potatoes to go along with our beans. And one thing that Josie does, and I couldn't find a jar a while ago, so she says they're out there, and I just overlooked them, and I'm sure I did. But I found a jar of black-eyed peas that she's canned this year. But you take your peas, she puts them in, or maybe she'll do a video on this, or maybe you've done it and you know what she's doing. She puts a few peas in here, puts the water, pressure cans these, and they're ready to eat. You could put these in a pot on the stove, warm them up, and maybe let them boil for a few minutes to get a good boil and get them ready to go. And you could add some seasoning to them. But these are black-eyed peas, but they're ready to go. You can jar them up this way. You don't have to. When I was growing up, they just left them dry and they just cooked them on the stove. But in a pinch, if you were in a hurry and you had them already like this, you can even buy them in cans at the store that's already ready. Black-eyed peas, pinto beans. Now, to me, the store-bought pinto beans that are in a can kind of have a can taste to me, a tin taste or something. They do not seem to be as good, but if you're hungry, you'll eat. And people's like, you know, well, what would I do about my children that have to go to McDonald's every day? I'm going to tell you, if they get hungry, they'll eat. And I had a little boy one time had come to a camp we had, and I taught a group of boys called Royal Rangers. Used to be real big in that. It's like Boy Scouts. And we'd have a menu. We would buy all the food, get everything ready. I would lay out the menus for the camps and how all that was going to go. And that's where we stuck with. We did not bring special for anyone. This little boy come, and his one of the leaders told me, said he's my neighbor kid, and said he only eats McDonald's. Well, we were a long ways from McDonald's, probably an hour away. So to get, you know, that's out of the question. So when we ate the first night of our camp, we called it Rainbow Stew. But everybody brought a can of whatever it was you had to eat. You could bring chicken noodle soup, you could bring SpaghettiOs, you could bring beef, anything that was in a little tin can. You could have brought just a can of corn, whatever. We dump all that in a big old pot and put it on the fire, and a big black iron type pot, and we would heat that up. And that's basically all you got to do. All that stuff, it's got all the glutamates and all the different things, monosodium-glutamate and all the things that you don't need, words you can't pronounce. If you can't pronounce it, you shouldn't eat it. But still, that's what we would have the first night, because we were so busy with setting up camp and getting all the boys' tents ready, getting everything organized, getting the latrine ready, get everything fixed up so that we could have a good camp, that we didn't have time to fix a big meal. Now, we ate good, but by the time you got through setting up camp, you were so hungry, you did not care. And people would just dive in and eat that rainbow stew. And I know people have said, oh, that's gross. And it, may sound gross, but you mix all those chemicals together from that canned food, it's pretty good stuff. And that's what we would have. Well, this little boy, he come over and wanted to know if I had something other. And I said, no, sir, I don't. And he said, well, I don't like stew. And which I can say him thinking of that, but he's the only one we ever had who gave us any trouble over the stew. But he said he didn't want it or nothing. And I said, okay. So later he come over and he said, sir, do you have an extra bowl? He said, I didn't bring a bowl. Now, we sent them a list. If they were coming to the camp, we sent a list of what they needed. And one of the things was a bowl, a spoon, a knife, fork, so forth and so on, and plates and mess kit, basically is what they needed. So we had told him what he needed, but he didn't bring nothing. But I always had spares mess stuff that I brought because of this. So I went and got him a bowl and a spoon, and that little boy went through the line and got him a bowl of that, and he made 3 or 4 or 5 trips through the line. He just kept eating that soup, and later he told me that was the best soup he had ever had. And the rest of the camp, every meal we had, that little boy was going through for seconds and thirds and never complained. He survived without McDonald's, and it's because people spoil their children and all that. And if you can do that and you want to, that's your business. But I'm just saying, if hard times come, if what they call a life-changing event or a real world scenario, if something like that happens, some call it other words, but if something happens and you need food, if you had beans, you would find that a lot of folks would start to eat beans. Even though they didn't like beans, they would start eating them once they got hungry. So anyway, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a little bit here, and I've got a 5-gallon bucket here of beans, and I've had these beans since I write on the lid of the bucket. All I've done was bought a plastic bucket from Tractor Supply. I've got several of these with different things in them. But I bought a bucket. I put pinto beans, bought a 50-pound sack from Sam's, and I put them in there in September of 15. This is September of 2020. So 5 years later, they've not been opened, not been used out of. And we're going to look at these beans. They were purchased at Sam's. I wrote that on the lid too. I had to dust the lid off because it had accumulated some dust out there. But like I say, I've got several buckets of different things like this. And sometimes Josie will can them, pinto beans up. She's got some out there. Like I say, I couldn't find them. And she'll put them in jars. And the only reason for that is these are just ready to go. The water's already in there. The liquid's there. You can heat them up on the stove. They're ready in a few minutes. With any kind of food, you're going to need water. So if you're going to cook beans, you got to have some water put back. So just keep that in mind too. But you could, I believe, if you had beans or rice, you could survive. And I'll tell you, we just didn't have much rice around here. One of the things was we did not grow rice here in Oklahoma. I don't know of any place in Oklahoma that grows rice. In Arkansas, you get down around Stuttgart, Arkansas, they grow lots of rice. That's like the duck capital of the world down in that area. And the ducks come in and eat in those rice fields and everything. That's wonderful. We just didn't have it up here. And people here ate what they could grow, and beans was something that was easy to grow, or you could buy relatively cheap. And I love rice. I love fried rice. I like rice many different ways. So I don't much care for it for breakfast. I have, when I was a boy, my grandmother a few times fixed rice for breakfast, and it was on a rare occasion, and I just didn't much care for it. But that's okay. I would eat it if I was hungry. I want to say that rice is very easy to keep, and it's a really good thing. And we have a little bit of rice stored back, but we would eat rice more. We just don't. We eat more beans and that kind of stuff. But if you're more fond of rice, you could do the same thing with rice. Now, I don't think you could can the rice as far as putting it in liquid and have it ready. Wouldn't be good. But I will tell you what you can do with rice is you can store it in quart jars. You could store pinto beans dry in jars like this. You could store them in pop bottles. You could store them in dry, empty milk jugs. You can store beans and all kinds of stuff, and you could do the same thing with rice. Very easy to keep and store. My dad did not like rice. He still, as far as I know, does not eat rice, and he didn't even eat spaghetti. My dad always thought it looked like a bunch of earthworms. He won't eat spaghetti. He must have had a bad experience when he was a kid. I love spaghetti. I love fried rice. My dad won't eat chicken and dumplings, and I love chicken and dumplings. So I'm glad on those areas I pretty much took after my dad in about every area, people say, and I have to agree with them, but I don't on his food choices, because I do like some things that he don't like. But anyhow, nonetheless, getting back to the beans are a good choice, and you could store a bucket of beans in your if you lived in an apartment. You could store them in your garage, you could store them in your attic, you could store them in your basement. There's just so many places that you can. Now, beans are going up in price. They're not as cheap as they were, but everything's going to go up. But if you store some back, just in case something happens, you'd have a little bit of preparation back to see you through for a little while until you could get your feet back on the ground, so to speak. So I'm going to show you here the beans. Alrighty, folks, here's my bucket of beans, and I have these in a just an old Tractor Supply bucket. It was a new one when I bought it. It was all clean. When I say old, it's 5 years old now. It's been left out in one of our storage areas that we store, utility area, whatever you want to call it, where we store food. And I've kept this lid on here tight. I've got several buckets, like I say. I bought white ones just because white, to me, it represents more cleanliness, but you could put it in a black bucket, a pink bucket, a purple bucket, blue bucket. It wouldn't make no difference. Don't have to have Tractor Supply on it. That doesn't mean anything. But I got this. I put this lid on here. Now, some's going to say you got to do this and you got to do that, and you got to put moisture absorbers, and you got to put it in a special bag, a Mylar bag, and you got to put it all in here to store it. Well, these beans are edible and sustainable right now. Now, until today, this bucket has not been opened, and I have written on the top of this bucket, Pinto Beans. I don't know if you can see that or not. Pinto Beans 9/15. So September of 2015. It's getting faded. I don't know why. It's not been in the sun, but it is. And there I wrote Sam's, if you can read my old handwriting. And so we had these September of 2015. We're at the end of August, nearing the 1st of September of 2020. So we're going to look in here at these beans. These have been sealed up until today, not been bothered. And there's actually was another bucket of them on top of this one. And I had to clean the dust off because it was a little dusty. But anyway, we're going to see here. Now, these lids are tight. They're kind of hard to get off. But there's the beans. Now, I want you to look at that. I'm going to smell of them here. Smell good. Smell like dried pinto beans. I don't see any bugs. I don't see any problem. The only problem that I know of with these beans, Josie says when you use beans like this that are older, that you really need to soak them, that they take longer to cook. So if you soak them overnight, they will cook up quicker and easier. And the most recommend soaking them overnight anyway. But that's just good old-fashioned pinto beans that were bought in a 50-pound sack at Sam's. And a 50-pound sack of those will fill up 2 buckets. And we'll probably do another one here, another bag this year. And I think I've got a half a dozen of these buckets out there with beans in them. And I could plant these, and I think next spring, if I don't forget it, I'm going to take a scoop out of one of these buckets, probably this one, and go plant me a row of pinto beans and just prove to you that they would still come up. So if everything went to pot and you got to spring and you still had a handful of beans, you could go plant them. A handful like that will make a bunch. Now, it won't make a whole bucket full, but it will make a bunch of beans, just a few seeds. So these haven't been refrigerated. They've been in the hot. They've been in the cold. And what I'd say is make sure you put your lid on good. They're out in an uncontrolled area. I guess the mice or rats could eat through this thing if they wanted to, but nothing's bothered it. it's still just as good as it was, I believe, as it was the day I put them up. So if you're into prepping and you want, some of you have been asking ideas what to do, and this is one of the best ideas I know of, is to prep back beans, or you could put rice in a bucket like this. Now, one thing I would be concerned about is the possibility of bugs getting in here, so you want to make sure your lid is very tight. Someone told me before they put a couple of mothballs in the top of theirs to keep bugs out, but I have never yet, and all this time have not had any problem. We have some that are older than this. I just had to dig for the buckets out, but 2015, 5 years, this has done good, and probably beans have doubled in 5 years from the price that I originally paid for the beans. But anyway, just give you a little quick tip there on storing dried pinto beans. Well, folks, this is going to wrap it up for today for living on beans. May seem like a strange title for you, but I do appreciate you watching today, and I hope that you're prepping. I hope you're preparing. I really feel like, and I don't mean to go out and just be scared to death. We put our trust and faith in God, and there are millions of Christians that have felt the same calling from the Lord, that it is time to prepare, that the Bible prophecies are being fulfilled right before our eyes, and it's time to get ready. And there's going to be famines, which will mean food shortages. There's going to be things happening. We see it already in our country. I could get into all that, but it would take a whole nother porch talk, and we'll talk about some of that. We have already, and we'll talk about some of that, but I really want to talk about how to get prepared, and this is one way to get prepared. And one thing about it, you won't waste your money. If nothing ever happens, you can always go and get you some beans out and have beans for lunch, have beans for supper, have beans for the week, whatever. And if nothing happens, what have you lost? Nothing. You've just got some extra beans, rice, whatever. So a few things put back, but I think it's wise. It's wise to take heed today and to put some stuff back and get prepared. And don't wait. Now, right now, there are a lot of you watching that have waited till the last minute. We get people telling us, you think you've wasted the last minute, but you haven't. You got time. You can prepare. But people are concerned and panicking, and we have people, oh, I can't get jars, I can't get this, I can't get that. The store's sold out of beans. The prices have gone up. I don't have the money, blah, blah, blah. What am I going to do? Start slow, and work at it one day at a time, and ask God to help you. Ask God to give you wisdom and guidance in what you're doing. And I will assure you, if you'll humble yourself before the living God, He will bless you. The Bible's full of promises in the Word of God that He will bless the righteous, and He does that. And if you'll do what God's telling you to do, and pray about it. Watch videos, YouTube videos. There's people that show you all kinds of stuff how to do. Watch Alaskan Prepper. He's a good one. There's so many others. I can't even think of their names right now. Ice Age Farmer. I like to listen to him for some information. But we know it's coming. The Bible tells it is. If you're a Bible believer, you might as well get on board, folks. It's coming. And if you're prepared. But with all these uncertainties, the last 5 years, we have been full of all kinds of uncertainties, weather events that have boggled the minds. This hurricane that just come through down in Louisiana, it was not even a Category 1 for quite a while. Then finally it went to a 1, and they were saying, well, it might go to a 2. Then they said, well, it might go to a 3, but it's not looking. It ended up, I believe it was a Category 4 in the worst end. Whichever case it was, it did catastrophic damage. It was quick moving, but it did catastrophic damage. Up north here in Iowa, they had, or northwest of us here, they had those Durango, whatever it was called, as a land hurricane that knocked the corn down. destroyed homes, destroyed farms. Last year we had massive flooding here like nobody had ever seen before in the history of Oklahoma had we seen the kind of flooding we had. The year before that was the biggest wildfires here in Oklahoma I'm talking about. I know you all live around the world and you live other places and you've got things, but you tell me the same thing in your neck of the woods. So I understand we're going through some very rough, tough times. So why not get prepared a little bit so that you're not sitting there saying, help, help, I didn't prepare and I need help. You know, they have that little button you wear that says, help, I'm falling, I can't get up. Well, a lot of people need one of those because they're going to be hollering, help, I didn't prepare and I need some help. Get yourself prepared. And not being prepared is, I'm not saying go out and spend every dime you got. Don't go out and panic. Don't go out scared to death, but start studying this and start getting prepared. We started preparing really seriously about 12 years ago. We were canning, we were doing things, but about 12 years ago, we had felt the Lord telling us to begin to prepare. And we started preparing, and we have this beans here were 5 years ago. So, you know, we started preparing. And we have preps back, and we have gone through a couple of times, actually 3 different times since we prepared, that we really needed the stuff. It was short-lived, but we had the stuff. We weren't going to the store panicking and all that. I can tell you some stories about all that later in another video, but get yourself prepared. We sure appreciate you watching today. May God richly bless you, and we'll see you next week on Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock for another episode of Porch Talk. And we're gone.